For 10 years, I set 6 plates, but nobody came.
Dad, why did you sell the house and disappear?
Because you only remembered me after I vanished. With millions.
The night I finally disappeared, I set the dining table for 6. There were 6 white plates, 6 folded napkins, and 6 glasses catching the soft yellow light from the chandelier. In the center sat a pot roast I had cooked for nearly 5 hours, the kind Jennifer used to make on Sundays, with carrots around the edges and potatoes soaking up the gravy. But no one came. Not my sisters, not my daughter, not my son. I sat alone at the head of the table on my 67th birthday, listening to the clock tick in the hallway. At 8:30, I stopped pretending anyone might still knock on the door. I ate 1 serving, scraped the other 5 into containers, and washed every plate. Then I looked at the empty chairs and made a decision. For 10 years, my family had lived as if I no longer existed, so I decided to make it official. My name is James Richardson, and this is the story of how I sold everything, vanished with millions, and taught 4 people that love is not the same as permanent access. It began when my wife, Jennifer, pancreatic cancer, took her only 6 weeks after the diagnosis. 6 weeks is cruel in a very particular way. It is long enough to watch someone you love grow weaker every day, but far too short to say everything that needs saying. Jennifer was 53. She had a half-finished novel beside the bed and a Pinterest board called When We Finally Go to Italy. We had spent years promising each other we would go someday. Someday never came for her. We had been married for 26 years. She made coffee strong enough to wake the dead, left socks beside the bathroom hamper instead of inside it, and laughed at my worst jokes as if I were the funniest man alive. She was not merely part of my life. She was the structure holding it together. When she died, the house remained standing. The furniture stayed in place. Her coat still hung beside mine, but the building had lost its foundation. At the funeral, my family surrounded me. My older sister Hannah held both my hands. "If you need anything, James, anything at all, you call me." My younger sister Rachel nodded. "We're here. You're not alone." My daughter Brooke hugged me and cried into my shoulder. My son Austin stood beside the grave, staring at the ground as the casket was lowered. I believed all of them. During the first month, I discovered that cooking quieted my mind. When onions sizzled in a pan or bread rose in the oven, grief had to wait outside the kitchen. So I cooked the meals Jennifer had taught me: lasagna, chili, stuffed peppers, and her Sunday pot roast. Then I invited the family. That first Sunday everyone came. The house filled with voices again. Hannah criticized the way my son-in-law loaded the dishwasher. Rachel retold an embarrassing story from our childhood. Brooke showed me videos of my grandchildren. Austin arrived late, ate 3 plates, and said, "Dad, this is incredible." Standing in Jennifer's kitchen, surrounded by noise, I thought we were going to survive. I did not realize they were attending a funeral tradition, not beginning a family tradition. The disappearances happened gradually. Hannah developed Sunday conflicts. Rachel said the 2-hour drive was exhausting. Brooke and her husband were overwhelmed by the children's schedules. Austin, who lived 12 minutes away, began sending the same message every week. "Can't tonight." The rain checks were never collected. 4 months after Jennifer died, I made chili and called Austin. The call went to voicemail. "Hey son, I made enough for an army. Stop by if you want." 2 hours later, he texted that he was busy. I ate alone and told myself not to take it personally. People had jobs, people had children, people had lives. But during the first year after my wife died, the 4 closest members of my family called me a combined total of 11 times. I know because I began recording the calls in my phone. Hannah called 3 times. Rachel called twice. Brooke called 4 times, although 2 were accidental. Austin called twice, once to ask whether I still had his camping equipment. I hated that I counted. But loneliness turns ordinary details into evidence. In the second year, I kept trying. I invited them every Sunday. I called on birthdays. I offered to drive twice. I went to Brooke's house without an invitation because I wanted to see my grandchildren. The second time, I sat in her driveway for 10 minutes, ashamed to knock on my own daughter's door. When she opened it, surprise crossed her face. "Dad." We were just heading out behind her. I could see her husband lying on the sofa in sweatpants, holding the television remote. "Of course," I said. I was only in the neighborhood. I lived 45 minutes away. I drove home, warmed up leftover pot roast, and watched a program I did not care about until it was early enough to go to bed. Year 2 became year 3. Year 3 became year 4. Every holiday, I set more places than I needed. Every Sunday, I cooked too much food. My freezer slowly became a museum of unanswered invitations, lasagna in foil trays, chili in plastic containers, slices of birthday cake no one had shared. A therapist named Dr. Calloway told me to express my feelings clearly. So in the 5th year, I asked Hannah to meet me for coffee. "I'm struggling," I told her. "I miss Jennifer, but I miss all of you too. I feel invisible." She gave me a warm, sympathetic smile. "Oh, James, you know we love you, and you live 40 minutes away." "I know. We'll do better," she promised. Nothing changed. I tried Rachel next. "I feel like I'm making all the effort," I said. "I don't know what I'm doing wrong." She sighed. "James, we have lives. You need to stop being so sensitive." Her words did not make me angry. They made something inside me go quiet. Still, I kept reaching out. In the 7th year, Austin called and asked for $26,000. A business investment had collapsed, and he had 2 weeks to pay what he owed. "I know I haven't been good about keeping in touch," he said, "but you've always been there for me." That sentence should have warned me. Instead, it gave me hope. I transferred every dollar. For the next 2 years, Austin called regularly. He came to dinner. He remembered my birthday. He asked how I was sleeping and whether I needed help around the house. He also repaid the loan in monthly installments. The week he made his final payment, the calls stopped. Perhaps it was not deliberate. By then, intent no longer mattered. The silence felt exactly the same. 2 years later, my 67th birthday fell on a Sunday. I invited everyone and made Jennifer's pot roast. Brooke mailed a card. Hannah sent a text. Rachel called for 4 minutes and spent half the conversation complaining about her neighbor's fence. Austin had a cake delivered. No one came. At 8:30 that evening, while washing 6 clean plates that had never been touched, I finally understood something. I had not been waiting for my family. I had been waiting for the family we used to be. The family Jennifer had stitched together with patience, food, and love. That family had died with her. I had simply refused to accept the death certificate. The next morning, I called a realtor from 3 towns away. Our house was worth $430,000. Between the sale, my retirement accounts, Jennifer's life insurance, and investments accumulated over decades, my assets were worth several million. "List the house," I said. The realtor studied me. "Would you like time to think about it?" "I've had 10 years. The house sold in 3 weeks to a young couple expecting their first child. They wanted a fast closing, so did I. I consolidated my accounts, arranged for electronic statements, canceled my old telephone number, and deleted the social media profiles Jennifer had created for me. I was not hiding from the law or doing anything improper. I simply stopped making myself convenient to find. 3 hours away, beside a quiet lake, I rented a 2-bedroom apartment in a town called Mill Haven. I packed Jennifer's photographs, her grandmother's quilt, our books, my clothes, and the cast iron skillet that had belonged to her family for generations. I left the dining table. On my final morning in the house, I opened the freezer. Inside were the remains of 10 years of hope, labeled and dated in my own handwriting. Sunday chili, Christmas lasagna, Brooke's favorite casserole, Austin's birthday stew. I closed the door without taking any of it. Then I walked through every room, stood in Jennifer's kitchen for the final time, and whispered. I tried. I left the key for the realtor and drove away without a note. My first night in Mill Haven, I slept for 11 hours. That may not sound extraordinary, but I had spent a decade waking at 3 in the morning, listening for a telephone that never rang. 11 uninterrupted hours felt like freedom. I began walking the 6-mile trail around the lake every morning. I joined a small gym and discovered a bookstore run by a widower who argued with me about novels. On Tuesday mornings, we drank coffee and disagreed about everything. I cooked for one. At first, that felt like surrender. Then it began to feel honest. I made exactly what I wanted, ate when I was hungry, and never packaged leftovers for people who were not coming. 6 weeks after I left, Hannah tried my old number and discovered it had been disconnected. Brooke drove to the house and found a stranger holding a baby at the door. "My father lives here," Brooke said. "I'm sorry," the woman replied. "We bought this house 6 weeks ago." That was when my family finally noticed I was gone. They compared notes and realized none of them knew when they had last spoken to me. Austin attempted to report me missing, but the police explained that a competent adult who sells his property and moves away is not missing. Hannah hired an investigator. 8 months after my departure, I returned from my morning walk and saw Brooke sitting on the steps outside my apartment. "Dad," she said, rising quickly. Her eyes were swollen. "We didn't know where you were." "I know," I replied. "That was the point." She began to cry. "How could you do this? We thought something terrible had happened." I sat beside her, but I did not comfort her. Some truths disappear when we soften them too quickly. "When is my birthday?" I asked. What date is my birthday?" She hesitated. "September 12th. The 19th. It has been September 19th for 67 years. She wiped her face and looked down. "How many times did you call me during the year before I left?" "Dade, 4 times. 2 were accidents. The lake behind us was perfectly still. I cooked every Sunday for 10 years. I continued. I called. I invited. I drove to your house and sat in the driveway because I was embarrassed to knock. I told Hannah I was lonely. I told Rachel I was struggling. I gave Austin $26,000 and watched him care about me until the debt disappeared. I'm sorry," she whispered. "I believe you." The hope flickered in her eyes. "But you are sorry now, because I am no longer waiting where you left me." She stared at me. She had Jennifer's eyes, which made what I said next almost unbearable. "I live here now. You're not coming home." "Home to what, Brooke?" She had no answer. The others came one by one. Hannah sat at my new kitchen table, looking at the clean apartment and the view of the lake. "You seem fine," she said, almost disappointed. "I am fine. Do you understand how scared we were? Do you understand how lonely I was?" She looked away. "You called me 3 times during my final year in that house," I said. "You lived 40 minutes away." "I was busy. For 10 years. Tears filled her eyes. "Will you forgive us?" "No." Her mouth fell open. "James, we're your family. You had 10 years to be my family. So you're done with us." "I did not end this, Hannah. I stopped pretending something was alive after all of you had let it die." I handed her a napkin when she cried, but I did not take back my words. "I love you," I told her. "But love is not the same as access. You cannot ignore someone for a decade and expect forgiveness to be waiting like an unclaimed package." Rachel called instead of visiting. "You're being selfish," she declared. I laughed. The first deep, honest laugh I had felt in years. "You told me to stop being sensitive," I reminded her. "So I did. I stopped feeling responsible for keeping this family together. Then I left." "That isn't fair." "No," I said quietly. "It really isn't." Then I hung up. Austin came last. He drove 3 hours on a Sunday and arrived carrying the camping equipment he had once called to ask about. He looked exhausted, unshaven, and frightened. "Can I come in?" he asked. I made coffee. For several minutes, he stared at the photograph of his mother on my shelf. "I know sorry isn't enough," he began. "After Mom died, looking at you reminded me of her. Calling you meant facing what we lost, and I couldn't do it. I kept telling myself I would call tomorrow. Then tomorrow became months. The months became years. I didn't understand what I had done until Brooke found strangers living in our house." His voice broke. I wanted to reach across the table. A father never loses the instinct to rescue his child, even when the child created the disaster. Instead, I said. He looked up. "I believe every word. You were hurting. You ran from the pain, and eventually running became normal." A relief touched his face, but it changes nothing. The relief vanished. "I lent you $26,000 because I thought it might bring us back together," I said. For 2 years, while you owed me money, you remembered I existed. When the final payment cleared, you disappeared again. Dade. I spent 10 years making myself available to people who treated my presence like a guarantee. You believed the phone would always be answered. The pot roast would always be warm. Dad would always be sitting in that house with 6 places set. I walked to the window. Morning light turned the lake silver. I'm not angry anymore, Austin. Anger would mean I am still waiting for you to change. I have moved on, exactly as all of you moved on without me. So there's no way back. There is a way forward, I said. Maybe we exchange Christmas cards. Maybe we have dinner once a year somewhere neutral. But the father waiting beside the telephone is gone. He is not coming back. Austin swallowed hard. That sounds like a stranger. Now you understand how I felt for 10 years. He left before noon. I want to be clear, my disappearance was not revenge, a breakdown, or a desperate cry for attention. It was a boundary 10 years late. For a decade, I offered Sunday dinners, holidays, money, honesty, and second chances. I said, I am lonely. I said, I am struggling. I said, I need my family. They heard me. They simply believed I would wait forever. The strangest part is that I do not miss them as much as I expected. What I missed for 10 years was not the people they had become. I missed the family we were when Jennifer was alive. Now I walk around the lake every morning. I argue about books on Tuesdays with a man who has become my closest friend. I cook good meals, sleep through the night, and wake without dread. My telephone is quiet because I chose quiet. 3 weeks after Austin's visit, I opened Jennifer's old Pinterest board. At the top was the photograph of Florence she had saved years ago. That afternoon, I booked a flight to Italy. Florence first, then Rome, then south along the coast until I run out of road. I will eat at outdoor tables where I do not speak the language. I will drink wine in the afternoon and watch strangers hurry through lives I know nothing about. Somewhere along the way, I will order the best meal I can find and raise one glass, not to the family who forgot me, to Jennifer, the woman who always showed up. For 10 years, I set the table for people who were never coming. I do not do that anymore. The final empty place setting has been cleared away, and for the first time since my wife died, I am no longer waiting.